I'd like to start this panel presentation by asking that we all watch this brief animated graphic that's on the screen behind me. It lasts about 2 minutes. Thanks. Oh, I see the thing. As we watch, this is a graphic representation of the North American to African slave trade. Each dot represents an individual ship. North and South American. Thank you. In watching that graphic, which, by the way, credit to Slate magazine, which compiled this information from records of slave. Whoops, that's not what I want to do. How do I go to the next slide? Let's see. Here we go. That essentially represents in graphic form this catastrophe in human history. I think as a backdrop to this conversation, it speaks for itself. And I'm very grateful to Susan Stessin-Cohn for providing that graphic. Thank you, Susan. When we think about the trade that brought these human beings into North and South America, we're not even talking about those born into chattel slavery in North America and the impact that has had on their lives. So that's backdrop for this conversation that I think is pretty important as we think about Sojourner Truth's life and legacy. And I think we have one more slide, right? For those who are interested in the numbers, this is another representation of what we saw in that animated graphic. Last fall, Professor Nicole Carr, Black Studies, came to me and expressed a strong concern at the lack of basic archival documents for a foundational study of African American culture and history in our library. As we talked, she and members of the library faculty and I, we came to believe that a panel discussion that highlighted the importance of building and making accessible such an archive might be a good way to increase awareness on campus and beyond campus of this very urgent need. As I was researching this, actually, I discovered that in my remarks before a panel discussion with Nell Painter when she visited campus in 2015, I also talked about the problem of a lack of documentary evidence in a library named for Sojourner Truth and the need for us to continue to look for ways to build that. At almost exactly the same time, Professor Edith Kuiper approached me with a novel idea that the library create an annual lecture event, Sojourner Truth Day. The idea grew out of an interest expressed by students in her Women and Work course, and that research by one student in particular, River Wasserman, had helped flesh out as a concept. Edith, are you here, River? Okay, well, they were very instrumental in making this happen, and I'm very grateful to them for that idea. I'd like to take a moment to introduce our panelists, and then I want to say just a few brief words about both Sojourner Truth and our library. So, first panelist, and I'm going to try and do them in order as they're seated, Susan Stessin-Cohn, former professor of social studies and education at SUNY New Paltz, is currently historian for the town of New Paltz. She is a co-author of In Defiance, Runaways from Slavery in New York's Hudson River Valley, 1735 to 1831, published in 2016. A copy is, of course, in the library. I encourage you to check it out once I return it. A.J. Williams-Meyers, Emeritus Professor of Black Studies at New Paltz, is the author of Long Hammering, Essays on the Forging of an African-American Presence in the Hudson River Valley to the early 20th century, and, in their own words, Voices from the Middle Passage, published in 2009, among many, many other publications in a very distinguished career. Dr. Nicole Carr, Assistant Professor of Black Studies at SUNY New Paltz and an active and popular scholar in our community. Her scholarship employs Black feminism, whiteness studies, and cultural studies to engage the tenacity of the mammy archetype for the ways it informs and complicates representations of Black women's humanity in and beyond the public domain. I think it is particularly apt to have Dr. Carr speaking in a panel on a woman whose gender was openly challenged in public because she was seen as not being feminine enough. Greer Smith, finally, is founder and president of TRANSART and Cultural Services, Incorporated, an organization committed to promote an understanding and appreciation of the culture, history, and arts of the African diaspora. Notably, the presentation, the exhibition, I should say, Someone's Calling My Name, organized for the quadricentennial of the city of Kingston. This groundbreaking exhibition is now on display in the Sojourner Truth Library to accompany this panel presentation. I cannot recommend it strongly enough. Everyone here should budget some time, because it's a very rich presentation with a lot of information, to stop into the main lobby of the library and view this exhibition. It is a very powerful series of statements on the economic and cultural and political ramifications, if you will, of slavery in the Hudson Valley and in Ulster County particularly. Okay. I want to just highlight that Sojourner Truth is very well known and yet very unknown to most people. Most people know who she is, and they know this iconic photograph of her or one similar to it. But they don't know the details of her life, that she was born into slavery in Hurley, New York. That in 1810, when she was 12, she was sold to John Dumont. And when Dumont broke his promise to free her in 1826, she took her baby and walked to New Paltz, where she was taken in by the Van Wagenen family. I won't go into all the details of her life here, but I think it is really important for people to understand about her that she was born into slavery here. That slavery was an extraordinarily powerful institution in Ulster County during the early history of this country. And of course, as we've been discussing on campus in our conversation about the naming of buildings, is still very present with us. I'd like to thank one of our librarians, Morgan Gwenwald, who created this card for us as a background for this discussion. Many more will be available for you to pick up in the back, as well as our Sojourner Truth buttons I encourage you to take. Finally, before we start the panel, I'd like to just take a moment to acknowledge Librarian Emeritus Krim Nyquist, Dr. Krim Nyquist, who for many years gathered and shared research on the life and work of Sojourner Truth. Corinne, are you here? Is she here? Her energy in this cause was legendary on campus and inspired generations of students, including Janice Adams, who returned to campus last fall to deliver the extraordinary distinguished lecture, Know When to Leave the Plantation. I'm going to now give you a little bit of the ground rules for this. Each of our panelists is going to speak very briefly, probably 5 to 7 minutes, on aspects of Sojourner Truth's life or the environment into which she was born and in which she lived. And then we will have some questions that I will engage the panelists with. And at that point, we will also welcome and encourage members of the audience to participate. Do we have a microphone? It doesn't look like we have a microphone, so you don't have to come all the way down or shout, or we'll figure it out. This event is being videotaped, so if that is something that is a concern to you, you should just be aware that that is happening if you think about speaking here. With that, I'm going to turn the podium over to Susan to begin. Thank you.
Okay, that's better. What I thought I would do was just give you some background about the time period, 1790s to early 1800s, when Isabella, which was Sojourner Truth's name during that time period, when she was growing up here in Ulster County. So I'm just going to lay some, let's see, okay. I thought I'd start out with a couple of quotes. Life is a hard battle anyway. If we laugh and sing a little as we fight the good fight of freedom, it makes it all go easier. I'll not allow my life's light to be determined by the darkness around me. And then my favorite one, oh no, honey, I can't read little things like letters. I read big things like men. So I thought that was a great quote. There she is. So again, if you look at that time period, 1790, if we looked at the state of New York, there were 21,000 enslaved people in New York at that time. If we look at Ulster County, there was a population of 26,000, and almost 3,000 of that population, which would be about 10%, were enslaved. And if we look at New Paltz, just at our town of New Paltz, there were 245 enslaved people living here in 1790, and 602 other, Hurley. I'm sorry, I messed it up here. New Paltz, there are 302 enslaved Africans living. That made up 13% of the population. And I was looking before at Hurley. Hurley had 245 enslaved Africans, and that was 29, almost a third of the population of Hurley, where Sojourner Truth was growing up, was enslaved. So I'm going to just tell you this very quickly. People say, and again, if you look at your card, there's a little typo here. It says slavery ended in New York State in 1829. It should read 1827. So there was just a little typo here. But anyway, I've often talked to teachers about this because they say blanketly, slavery ended in New York in 1827. And that's really not the way slavery ended. It was very gradual. I'm not going to go through all the details, but it started in 1799, and it really didn't end until 1848, when everyone who was enslaved or was the child of an enslaved woman was actually freed in New York. So there's some of the details. So in New Paltz, we are very fortunate in that we have a book that was kept. It was called the Register of Slaves, or the Manumission book. And this book, actually, here's a page of the book, listed, so part of the law of 1799 said that if you had an enslaved woman living with you and she gave birth to a child, that child had to be registered with the town clerk. So they had to come to the town clerk, and their name would be put in the book with the name of the baby and the date they were born. And if they didn't do this by the time a child was 1, there was some different things that would be done, supposedly like the child would be freed later, but they kind of made it work the way they wanted to work. So even if a 3-year-old was brought in, most likely they were still thought of as being under 1. Okay, this that overlapped actually is a bill of sale for a woman by the name of Molly. She's 15. If I had to have one document that told the story of slavery in Ulster County, this one document would be probably one of the most important. And if you read it, a remarkable, smart, healthy Negro wench, about 22 years of age, used to both housework and farming, and sold for no fault but for want of employ. She has a child about 9 months old, which will be at the purchaser's option. So there's a baby that's, it doesn't make a difference if you want to take the child with the mother. Here's some other for sale notices that were local in the local papers. And there's actually one right from our town, from New Paltz, Rolla Felting. And here's a 12-year-old boy and a 32-year-old woman. This is a runaway notice for a woman named Susanna and her son of Hurley. This one was a very interesting notice because it starts off with the word ungratefully. So this man ran away, and that was considered ungrateful. This one actually is from right here in New Paltz, David Hasbrook, Nathaniel Lefevre, and Andre Lefevre. And there were 3 men that ran away together. I've actually been able, I know where the houses were. This notice I found really, really interesting, and I think in my book, I forgot how many notices we have, but I've gone through thousands of notices. You have a hardcover. That's great.
Things right in the library.
There's a man, Ishmael, who actually runs off with 3 people, 3 children. One is 13, one is runaway, a Negro man named Ishmael, 2 boys. One is 13 years of age, the other about 6, and a baby that's 19 months old. And the last document I'm going to leave you with for now is probably the most unsettling of the documents. Actually, in New Paltz, there was a group of Huguenots that got together into a group they called themselves the Society of Negroes Unsettled. And this document actually references that there were 3 men that were picked out of the group that were bounty hunters that went out, and on the back of this document is the name of the enslaver and the person that was enslaved that ran away. And there's all kinds of details in terms of how much money is given to the person that finds them according to how far they traveled. So I have lots more documents, and I have 5 minutes, so I'm done with my 5 minutes, but just wanted to give you some background.
Thank you. I guess I'm next. Very, very good. It's good to be back in classroom again. Anyway, Susan said by 1790, there were over 21,000 slaves or enslaved people in New York. And what that tells us is this. That 21,000 was 7,000 less than Georgia. One would assume because this is the North, there would have been fewer numbers. At least it wouldn't be as near to the southern states or colonies. But we have to tell ourselves and share with ourselves, and that is that New York had slaves. It was not a society with slaves. It was a slave society, which meant there was a continuum of slavery from the south to the north. Even though the numbers were small, it was slavery. It meant that I, as an enslaved person, I did not own myself. My children, whom I had with another enslaved woman, we did not own them, which meant there were always the possibility that the owner, male or female, could take them and sell them, or just remove them from us, because we, for all intents and purposes, didn't even own ourselves. And as Susan has shared with you as well, in order to ensure that slaves remain with you, there was always this phrase they used in the South as well as here in the North, in terms of those who were enslaved. How do you get them to be obedient to you? The goal is to make them stand in fear of you. Not that the African or Africans totally stood in fear. Sometimes they gave the owner the face that they wanted to give them or they wanted to see, and at times they kept it to themselves. As I've always said to my students, and I've shared with others, you would tell your owner, when you go to bed tonight, make sure you have your gun with you, because you can rest assured that we will take you out. Resistance was persistent. Resistance was real. Africans gave them the face they wanted, but the real face was, we are human. How dare you do this to us? So there were riots, there were rebellions. We talk about the 1712 and 1741 rebellion in the lower part of New York. They burnt the city down. Follow me. They killed. And the conspiracy that was discovered around Kingston, slaves communicated with Native Americans that we're going to take them out. But what they didn't realize, the two who were in charge, who were making the plans, didn't realize that the owner was home. And therefore we didn't get that rebellion just prior to the American Rebellion of 1777, 76, however you want to call it. Resistance was a common factor in slavery. And New York, I said, with that 21,000 or more, the heart of slavery in New York was the Hudson Valley. The land ownership of Europeans who invaded, intruded on Native American territory. Some would say they signed treaties to give us this land. No. Maybe they did. Maybe they were coerced. But the object was the land was taken. One of the biggest land holdings in the valley was the Hardenberg patent of over 1 million acres. The Livingston patent, the Livingston estate, over 600,000. Follow what I'm saying? The land was taken. So the heart of New York was the Hudson Valley. Lumber, wheat, cattle herding, all here. the wealth that poured in. And folks, keep in mind as well, in terms of slavery, is the wealth that was accumulated, even though the African did not benefit, to an extent to that. But it allowed Europe, when we think in terms of slavery as a whole, the wealth accumulated from slavery allowed Europe to make the jump from commercial capital to industrial capital. Read W.B. Du Bois, Capitalism and Slavery. Very simple. It's there. It made New York wealthy. So when we talk in terms of what? How do you pay them back? How do you pay them back? That's what we have to do. We have to do in this generation. Pay them back. Thank you.
Okay, I just want to thank my colleagues, just really passionate speeches, and just really thinking about this deeply. And I almost want to respond to some of the things that they're saying because it's just so much, but I'm going to stick to my script, and then hopefully we'll have a Q&A. So in October 2016, Richard Hatcher, the former mayor of Gary, Indiana, returned Nat Turner's skull to his descendants. For nearly 185 years, Hatcher's family had kept Turner's skull as a relic, passing it down through each generation. Turner's family could not even lay their descendant to rest, even in death, because his family was owned by a white family who only came forward with this skull after the birth of a nation. The movie came out recently. So this is the afterlife of slavery. Black lives, this is what Sadia Hartman says is the afterlife of slavery. Black lives are still imperiled and devalued by a racial calculus and a political arithmetic that was entrenched centuries ago. This is the afterlife of slavery. Skewed life chances, limited access to health and education, premature death, incarceration, and impoverishment. For my purposes, I'm looking at the afterlife of slavery as also who owns these documents, right? Like, do black Americans have access to these documents? For instance, when I'm talking about the Sojourner Truth Library, and I was actually going to take my students, I was like, oh, I'm teaching, Intro to Black Studies. I want to take my students to the library, and I want them to see slave ledgers. I want them to see actual documentation. And the librarians were so sweet. They were helping me, but they were like, but there's nothing really here, right? And I was like, what do you mean there's nothing here? This is the Sojourner Truth Library. How can there be nothing here, right? So in thinking about the afterlife of slavery, I want us to think about who owns these documents and who should own these documents and who should have access to these documents. So the inability to own our own narratives, our stories, our records, our photographs, our skulls is the afterlife of slavery, right? And it's important for me as an instructor, as a professor, that my students can see these things, because then for my students it becomes real, it becomes tangible. It also legitimizes their history, right? If we think about New Paltz, if you're looking around New Paltz and just looking at the racial demographics, you don't really see too many black people, right? And you see even less black people on campus. And for students, this is extremely alienating, right? For my black and brown students, they come to me, they're alienated. They want to feel like they're a part of this community too. So I look at what does it mean when you can't get access to these records, right? So a little bit about Sojourner Truth. Again, the title of the library is the Sojourner Truth Library. And you want to think about this in terms of tokenization and what that looks like when you tokenize someone's legacy. So when you have her name on the library, right, and you have this beautiful mural of her, but there's nothing actually there that represents her legacy, right? So she just becomes this kind of token where SUNY New Paltz can say, we are actually involved in this kind of diversity process. We want to legitimize her, but we don't have anything that the students can relate to in this kind of way. So Sojourner Truth spoke Dutch and English, right? This is why she was brilliant, right? So she was bilingual. She was the first black woman to successfully sue a white man for illegally selling her son into slavery. She was an advocate for women's rights long before we even were thinking about feminism, right? She also helped recruit black Union soldiers to fight in the Civil War. And she did all this despite being enslaved at one point and despite being sexually and physically abused, right? And we know, historians have told us, she most likely never said "ain't I a woman" because she spoke Dutch was her first language, and then she spoke English. But we also know that Sojourner Truth was never questioning her status as a woman. She was a woman, right? She never questioned it. What she was questioning is white people's inability to see her as a human being, right? So that is really what I'm focusing on. I'm also, and I was thinking about Susan as she was talking, and I don't know if you all felt the same way, but for me to see all these records, I'm angry, right? I'm asking this question, as you were saying, like, how dare white people enslave us, right? And then actually house our documents in their libraries. And so black students can't even see these documents, can't even have access to these documents. And we were, over the course of doing this, I was talking to Susan, who was doing great work, and I'm really happy about the work that you do, and about the ways in which you're angry with me too. So I'm happy, I'm grateful for that. But I was talking to her, and she was telling me about this lady named Aunt Judy, right? Judy Jackson, right? And she was telling me about this photograph that is housed, that this family is housing this photograph, right, of Judy Jackson, this white family. And I said, well, why do they have this photograph of her? Like, why would you have a photograph of somebody that your people most likely enslaved at some, like, why would you carry this around? The same way the person is carrying around the skull of Nat Turner. Like, why would you do that? What is the racial calculus behind that would force you, that would think it's okay to carry someone's mother, someone's sister, right, around in your family trunk of archives, right? And I remember Susan said, well, what would you have them do? And I said, donate it to an African American research library or something like that. Dr. Williams-Meyers, you have a library now in, I think, Kingston, right, devoted to that type of stuff. Or even, like I said, the students here don't have anything that they can, like, look at. They don't have slave ledgers. And the point of this whole thing is that the town of New Paltz has the records. They have a lot of stuff, right? And we're not asking for all of the stuff, but some of the stuff. And again, this is not atypical. Most universities, and thinking about how you pay back these slaves who built these roads, who built these towns, who built these cities, right? How do you pay them back? Many universities house these documents and these records so that people can come and see them, so that it's public in this particular way. So we're not asking for anything that isn't already done, right? So I want us to think about that, and that's it.
Thank you.
I hope this is on, because I'm going to sit here.
Oh, is
this on?
Is her mic on? Should be.
Yep.
Okay. My job is a little bit different because I'm outside of the academy, but I'm also in it. The projects that I do to expand to the community the information, and particularly to our young people, has been my life's work. Coming here to this area, one of the first things we thought we should do is tell the story of how we got here. Big thing was how were we going to do it, how we were going to do it in a way that people would come and be interested, and then extend the conversation after. So it was the 400th anniversary of the first capital of New York State. We put on an exhibition called Somebody's Calling My Name After the Negro Spiritual, the same thing, because there was a calling for people to come, not just the ones of us that came here unwittingly, but after that, during the Great Migration, people came to this area for a reason. Part of that exhibition is Free and Half Free, which talks about the state of enslaved and sort of enslaved people as they were here, which many people did not know, and that's what's on view downstairs. It's not the entire exhibition. The exhibition was actually in 4 locations throughout the city of Kingston. This is a chronology of some of the watershed moments, but we did it in a way that young people would look at it, understand it, and then most likely talk about it, and also folks that think they knew of things find out that they did not know and look further. Free and Half Free. This exhibition traces the history of African American community in the Mid-Hudson Valley and its efforts to gain legal, and social equity from the Dutch period through the end of the 19th century. In 1625, 11 men became the Mid-Hudson Valley's first residents of African descent. The first women arrived a few years later. While enslaved, these early black residents could own property and marry in a Dutch church. The men could serve in the militia and testify against whites in a court of law. By 1644, the men petitioned for and won their freedom. While no longer slaves, they remained half-free, required to labor on Dutch West India Company public work projects and pay the company 22 bushels of grain and 1 fat hog every year for as long as they lived. While never equal of the Dutch freemen or freed indentured servants, those who remained enslaved could hope for a half-free status. Also after that, in 1869, talking about resistance, there was a New York State Convention of Colored Men in Utica, New York, in August of 1869. And their mission was, we have been laboring for the last 2.5 centuries to enrich this country without having received a particle of remuneration. We have not been promised our rights and have not yet received them. So one of the things, working in the community and working with young people, we always want people to know that black people were actively engaged in their liberation. May not have always turned out the way we wanted to, but we were always trying to break away. I'm going to cut to this notion about legitimizing legacy and how we talk and the language that we use when we're talking about this woman and what she represents. Legacy is not something that's necessarily tangible. It's not money. If we look at the definition of legacy in the contemporary English dictionary, it's something that happens or as a result of things that have happened at an earlier time. Sojourner Truth is an example of that. When we think about Sojourner Truth and what she did and how she had agency of herself, there's something in her DNA, in the DNA of African women that came before her and after her, that we have to recognize, and we want our young people to recognize. A lot of my talk today is going to be about to those folk back over there. So I want them to know that because I work with a lot of them, a lot of students that come from here, and they don't know things that they should know. I'm telling you how old I am. I'm a product of the 60s and the 70s, and you could not get out of the 60s and the 70s without doing one or several things. That's reading. If you don't know who Du Bois was, if you don't know who Fanon is, you could not have gotten out of the 70s or the 60s. When we talk about this institution and what we as a community can do, the forebears of this institution and this county owe a debt to people that can now only be repaid by ensuring the contributions of their labor, of African people, be celebrated, acknowledged in the form of young people attending and graduating from this institution with the knowledge of the people who came before them, with the shared ancestry, and their contributions to art, science, literature, etc. That is the debt that this institution, I know there's a lot of talk about changing names and buildings and stuff, and that's fine. But I don't want to ever have another student come before me and not know anything, and not know anything about where they came from and what's going to propel them to go forward. And that's the debt that this institution owes people. So I'm going to read off some names here. The legacy of Sojourner Truth. And if you don't know these names, take out a pencil.
I'm ready.
Ready? The legacy of Sojourner Truth is Nellie Larson. The legacy of Sojourner Truth is Maria W. Stewart. The legacy of Sojourner Truth is Zora Neale Hurston. The legacy of Sojourner Truth is Octavia Butler. The legacy of Sojourner Truth is Jane Cortez. The legacy of Sojourner Truth is Augusta Savage. The legacy of Sojourner Truth is Faith Ringgold. The legacy of Sojourner Truth is Catherine Dunham. The legacy of Sojourner Truth is Pearl Primus. And I'm going to stop there.
So I just have to say something in response to some of the other comments by the panelists that is this working? Can people hear me okay? Good. Okay. No? No? Up. How's that? I gotta get real close to it. Okay, here we go. How's that? Better? Good. Okay. Something that was recently brought to my attention. Let us say we were interested in the library, and we know we are interested in the library, in acquiring some of these foundational materials, these documents that, that make tangible some of this history. Coming up for sale in New York City is a lot of archival documents. And one of those documents is a court record, thank you, a trial account of an enslaved New York man for arson with the order to burn him at the stake. This is from Kingston, New York, 1730. For the library to purchase this document at auction, the estimated price of this 3-page document is between $2,000 and $3,000. So this is the sort of challenge that we would face in a time when so much of this history has been, I don't want to say snapped up, but I'm going to say it, because there's a sense that this now has monetary value. These stories, this history, it has been captured, and it will be hard to recover. So one of my big challenges as a library director is, how do we build an archive? And I'm hoping I can ask the panelists and people here in the audience to help us think about, first of all, what defines the documentary record. We tend to think very narrowly, I believe, of the documentary record. But there are objects, there are Bibles, there are photographs, there are portraits, there are handcrafted objects in this community, in this region, that help tell this story. They don't need to be sort of on yellow old paper to be important for us to understand some of this history that we've been discussing. And so as we look to say, let's meet a challenge in this college and this library to expand what resources we offer for those who want to dig into this history and understand this climate, this time, and the impact that we still feel today. What are the steps that we need to take? So I'm just going to offer to our panelists, it's a very long phrased question. How do we begin to build a collection of this material? We can, I just want to open it up that way. Let's see what people have to say. And we're going to turn it outward as well. Anyone want to jump on that?
Let me just start by saying, first of all, you would need an institution like this, that me or my group, could not do it by ourselves. Particularly when you see prices like this in terms of purchasing, unless we have a benefactor that could do it. But an institution could do it for us if they are dedicated, as we've been saying ourselves, to doing this and actually collecting these documents. So important, not only for those of us who are descendants of these enslaved people, but also those of us who are Americans, those of us who are citizens of this country, or even those who come later on, to let them know that we have a wealth, of information that tells the story of who we are as a people, the road we've traveled, and the road we hope to continue to travel into the future.
Just to add to that, one of the issues is having a repository that's also temperature controlled and humidity controlled. If we want to keep some of these, if we're talking about documents, per se, we need to have a facility, and hopefully the library is headed in that direction.
Well, actually, the library just completed a major renovation, which did bring climate control and expanded our special collections archival space. And for me, that does speak to a level of administrative support that we can build on. That was not cheap to do that work for the library. So I am optimistic that we can start to move in a direction of filling that space with the material that it really should have.
We're working in the community to organize and fabricate the Somebody's Calling My Name exhibition. The first thing for us was to do it differently. We wanted to, who the story was about to have ownership, so it was oral history driven. One of the things that I found is that we, as African people, have to work through is understanding our own value and what we have done in terms of labor, in terms of our creative capital, things that we take for granted, the significance of that. And that message doesn't get sent out enough. So after going to every barbecue, fish fry, and various other kinds of events to let people know how significant, somebody else's trash is somebody else's treasure kind of thing. That's a project that needs to happen. Maybe your students could do something like that in the summertime. Our own value, which is why I spoke about what I spoke about, we have not embraced our value. We do not understand that Western popular culture would be flat without the contributions of people of African ancestry. So we have to drive that point home.
I think also in terms of community is that we can't do it alone. Like obviously I'm a professor, but we're always inundated with stuff, and so it's a lot to try and do all this by, if we were going to take this on. So we would need like students to help. We would need people who are interested, are involved, So after, if this is over, if you are interested, you can sign up and at least I can get your email or something like that, because we would need students to like help us, right? We would need people to help us even compile these documents, even kind of figure out what's important and what's not, but definitely starting out with these auctions and things like that, which the items are not pricey, right? Or they're not too pricey. I can't afford them, but they're not too pricey for the university. So I think it would be a communal effort that we would have to do.
There are also local auctions. A lot of the artifacts that we acquired were in local auctions. There were always, if somebody's cleaning out an estate, this was the home for the idle rich were here all summer, so their homes were here. And that tangible legacy is here. And there's always an auction in Kingston or Rosendale or somewhere there's somebody that's cleaned out an estate, and you would be surprised some of the items that you'll find there. So if it was that kind of commitment from people that were interested to go to the auctions, and you wouldn't have to pay $2,000 for something that we should have anyway. But there are things all over this valley. This valley provided the food that fed the troops. This was a point in the triangle slave trade. So the corn, the wheat that fed the troops and fed the slaves came from right here. This was a significant part of what was happening in terms of that period of time, and folks don't know that.
Just to follow up on the thought of oral history, which is so powerful, I appreciate you reminding us of that. One other way that the institution, I think, has supported the library is in the creation of a digital art sciences and humanities lab in the library, which is well suited to capturing some of these kinds of narratives. And again, it's all about the person power to get a project launched that can start to pull in those stories. It is a challenge, and it's something that we're looking at lots of different ways to start reaching out into the community to gather those stories. So anyone who is interested or knowledgeable, we really do ask that you spread the word, let us know, and help us reach out and start to build. This is challenging work. Our library budget is very limited. I know that it seems like a large number, you know, to people, but academic resources are very expensive as well. So every dollar that we take from one thing, you know, that we put toward one thing comes from somewhere else. So this is challenging work. I do think it's work we can do, and I think it's what's helpful is that we are seeing that our history is continually being uncovered. It can, as people become aware, as the education happens, oh, these documents are important, they come out. So the more people that we have to reach out about this, the better. But we are beginning to become very well, you know, better resourced to start capturing some of this. Yeah.
I just say, well, what about linkages, linking up with other repositories in the valley? I mean, when I first started my research, I went up and down this valley, I mean, to various places. If there was a repository that could tell students or researchers where documents exist, it was very, very helpful. Really, it's very rich.
I want to turn this over also to folks in the audience. This is just one question, and there are other questions I hope out there for us as we think about brainstorming around, you know, building an archive and recovering this history. So at any point, feel free to put your hand up, and we'll include you in this discussion. Okay, I see one hand here and one over here. Okay, yes.
Addressing what you just said, but maybe the question is for Susan and you both, is the stuff in the public libraries, in the historical societies, the county clerk, where is this stuff?
I can tell you. Do you want me to answer that? Is that okay? Right now, all the documents that the town of New Paltz does own, the Manumission ledger, as well as the poor ledger, which actually deals with some people that were enslaved that were freed and needed some type of assistance. The town of New Paltz owns that. There's a little bit of an issue. It's being held by historic Huguenot Street, but the town would like to get possession of it. That's one thing. Haviland Highgard, which is also private, has some documents at the Elting Library, has some documents there as well. And the Hall of Records in Kingston, those are the county records, those are public. You can go up and see those records there. They do have some manumission records, they have bills of sales, they have, I'm trying to think what other, they have all the, we were just talking about, they have something called the Colonial Manuscripts, which are all the court records that were translated in the late 19th century by a man named Versteeg, translated from Dutch to English, so they're there. So they're scattered in different places, and then you can look at little libraries, and they have bits and pieces. I did do an online exhibit. It's called The Missing Chapter, and I have about 150 documents from different repositories that I got permission to place online, so you can see facsimiles, you can see copies of them. It's not the same as seeing the real document. There's a whole emotional thing. Like even when I was looking at the runaway slave notices, big difference between seeing microfilm and going to the Adrian's Library, where they actually have a lot of the newspapers, and being able to see it, hold it, and look at the newspaper, because that's when you realize how real it is, and it's much more emotional. So I don't know.
So
if that
what would have
answers
to happen? I'm sorry, I have a question. I know you. What would have to happen to get those, particularly the manumission papers, and from Huguenot Street or, you know, into this institution? What would have to
I think that would be, you know, an area for a conversation. I really don't know, and I wouldn't want to try and guess, you know, here. But
the county does own them.
The town, is it?
The town of New Paltz, there's there's 19 boxes of records that are called the Town of New Paltz records. They are owned by the town. They were temporarily placed because the town still is kind of floating around where our offices are. We're in trailers now. Mm-hmm. We're in trailers. And so they've been temporarily kept at historic Huguenot Street. There seems to be a little issue of ownership going on right now, and hopefully the town will regain them. We don't know where they could be placed after that. There's different places.
I think that having this information is really helpful as like ways to begin to pursue, asking questions, just like you asked. So having the information that these things are out there is something that we can talk about and we can pursue. So yeah, it's really important. And the more that we know, the more helpful that is. Yeah.
Question over there.
Yes, we had a question here. Yes, I would be the person to talk to, and I'm not necessarily saying that I'm the final person, but I can connect. I can be the person who can help connect us. No, I think that's a really helpful question, and why I continue to use the word legacy in speaking of Sojourner Truth. And thank you very much, Greer, for helping us really understand and expand that notion of what the legacy is, because there is a continuum of missing information, if you will, that kind of broadcasts out from that earliest time. And I could go on and on about all the different ways that history is absent from sort of the public record, because so much of it is either considered not valuable by us, or is considered very valuable and held. I mean, when you realize that you have something in your house that's worth maybe $2,000 or $3,000, you're like, oh, okay, I'm going to wait for the right moment to go with that. Yeah. So question. I don't know where we have. Okay, yeah, and then. Yeah.
I think my question is, I'm involved with some things that are happening with the Americans, also connected to and folks that are working in the whole world, where there needs to be a great deal of reconciliation. And so what I'm fascinated by, like listening to, of course, the country's always existing, and then sitting and focus on it. It just seems to me that some of the work that I see happening in the creative community, where things are finally coming out to think about the document that, and very briefly, there isn't really anything that can be done to feel individual people in terms of what the town can do or a church can do. I think relinquishing ownership, especially in this case, this is different. The native between the land was taken and people moved. People were not. Very different in places. So I feel like perhaps a movement, something like young people helping, the thing that comes to my mind as I was thinking here is like, hey, you know what? How about if we stop owning artifacts and owning people? And we have to make reconciliation as human beings. We're ever going to be able to feel it and to follow it. When we were saying that there was documents that precious for $2,000, and you're looking at ledgers that are people that were owned, it just seems like it's committing the crime again. That's what should be free.
I don't have an answer, but I think when we were talking and we were discussing all this, that was the frustration, and I'm not from New Paltz, I'm not from New York, right? So I learned a great deal from the people who are from here, who are from this area, and I learned how difficult it is to get these documents, they are not going to give it up without a fight, right? And even if the fight comes, you still may not get these documents. And so I think for people who are wanting to be involved, I think it would be really helpful to have people, but again, because it's like, and it's so crazy because it's like, why are these documents so valuable to you in this particular time, in this particular space, when, you know, you were the ones committing these atrocities, right? But now you're holding on to these documents. But one thing I've learned is really difficult to get these documents. So I don't have an answer for you, but I would say for those who are wanting to be involved, not just the students, not just black and brown people, but non-black and brown people, is that you have to be ready to be an accomplice, right? Like we talk about allies, right? But you have to be ready to be an accomplice. You have to be ready. You have to have some skin in the game. You have to be ready to kind of be disliked, right? To be the person that people are like, you know, she's doing this, and so you have to be an accomplice. You have to be ready to kind of put yourself in it in that particular way. And I say all that to say, I don't know if it's going to lead to the result that you're saying. I don't, and I've talked to Susan about some of her battles, her fights, and you know, and I don't know, but I feel like we're in a space in 2018. You see monuments coming down. You see this kind of reclamation of these kinds of atrocities. You see people trying to say, well, you know, why do we have this statue of this person if he was, you know, doing all these atrocities against people? So I feel like we're in a time where our voices can be heard, and where students in particular, we see this happening in universities, can initiate change. Like I said, we can't do, the four of us together can't do much, but then if the students and other people in the community get involved, then we can really amplify our voices.
Just for example, to add to that, several months ago, I had asked the town of New Paltz, as historian, if we could donate the Manumission ledger to the new museum, the African American Museum of History and Culture, the Smithsonian. And I had no support, went before the town board and was shot down immediately, that it's not leaving this town. And I really felt the best place for it would be in the Smithsonian. But again, getting support, if there had been 50 people there at the town board meeting, you know, saying we wanted to go there, or letters had come to the paper, you know, only one letter was in the paper saying that they didn't want it to move. So, and again, when you're talking about getting group support, letters to the paper, group support is a start. I know Adrian's library has a Manumission ledger, and they won't let, and it's a public library. And I've tried to sneak pictures of it, and I've done it like little, you know, like under the table kind of, getting digital images, but I've been told if I try to do anything with them, if I try and put that online, I'll be sued for that. So, again, you know, so I made a database of it, and I do have it. I do.
But before you take the next question, though, I don't want to lose what you said, because conversations like this are very important. And if everybody in here had that what you just said, if they were in another space at another time and said that, that's the continuum we have to be in, because the thought process is what gets us to the next step. And what you said was very profound, very important. And if we could keep, I know you can't go everywhere, but if everybody in here heard what was said, and hopefully we can put just that nugget out, because that's just so important. And how dare people that have committed all of these things try to hold on to stuff and then sell it. It is the most outrageous thing.
So I'm going to jump in quick, and now, AJ, I promise I'll give you the shot. But I think that the other piece, and I think we've already hinted at this, is the engaging in dialogue. Because I think dialogue, when people are face-to-face and having the conversation about the meaning of these items, people's minds and hearts can be changed. So that it doesn't always have to be you know, sort of organizing and rallying. It can be face-to-face over coffee and tea as you're talking to people to say, you know, I was at a presentation and something really hit me about the nature of these documents that are out there, you know, and so there's lots of avenues is all I'm trying to say. And I'm not saying that that means that we don't, you know, have people who come forward and advocate strongly. But there's just lots of pathways and libraries, frankly, are about these kinds of exchanges. They're the sort of the permanent record of dialogue, in a sense. And so that's something that I'm very big on, and I hope will come through as well. Yeah, and AJ, go ahead. Yeah.
Go out on a limb, and that is, can something of this nature fit into the reparations debate?
Well, I mean, I think when you're talking about truth, you know what I mean? In order to really tell the full story, you need to be able to expose people to these documents. I was looking at something again that Susan had shared. There was an act of the state of New York, and I don't know if you have that on screen. Yeah, I'm just going to step up here for a second. I just find it really profound to see in writing that the people of the state of New York, enacted by the people of the state of New York, that every Negro mulatto, help me out, what is that word?
Mestizo.
Mestizo?
Is that it?
Yeah,
Where are you?
yeah, oh, my cursor moved right here. At the time of the passing of this act, is a slave for his or her life shall continue such during her life unless she shall be manumitted in the manner prescribed. But then to go down to go down further, that the children of every Negro mulatto, being a slave, shall follow the state and condition of the mother. So what that, it's saying in law, the people of the state of New York are agreed this is what should happen. And when you put your hand on something like that, it seems to me powerful. And if we put those documents in front of people, they do, I hope, get people thinking. You had a question, and I don't know if you still have it because there was a lot of discussion. But yeah, did you want to?
I was wondering because I'm shocked by how much these documents cost. I was wondering if you compared to other historical documents that how the currency is more expensive than these.
I think it's probably, I don't know if there's an archivist in the audience. I'm not one. But I don't think that's out of line. I think those are kind of, not unusual prices for something like that. Yeah. Yeah, I see someone in the back here. Yep.
Some of the documents can vary according to what an appraiser does or what the person individual wants to give up the document, wants to sell it. And I say that from experience as an archivist, a librarian, and an educator.
Can we talk after? Yeah. Okay, so right here. Okay. You help me out.
Lance?
Talk loudly.
I said I shared the emotional ties in the street room. But I think that you have to understand the role of the university. And we work in the university mission and research university. And if it is, then it becomes easier to put them a line item. I do not agree that the documents in terms of Nicole were equivalent should be placed over the spectrum when we have control the role here at the library. So we, in essence, then we have to start using terms as a strategy in order to get one person a line item for the library.
Thank you. Yeah. So all the way in the back, and then you. That's you. Yeah.
I would like to second the recommendation made by Professor Carr
Yeah.
about using the existing resource, which the Sojourner Truth Library is, to inform more people about what the actual is Congress. And I also noticed that there's a this wonderful portrait of her by the elevator. There's no plaque there. There's no exhibit case underneath the portrait where we could easily exhibit copies of the narrative of Sojourner Truth, of which there are many copies available in the library. And I spend a lot of time at the library, so the library was a friend to me, and I feel like I'm a friend of the library. But I see that there are hundreds of people, prospective students and their parents, who come into the library all the time, considering whether these young people should enroll here. And I think it would be very easy to include an introduction to Sojourner Truth while they're walking past the portrait. You know, you might want to stop by later and take a closer look at this exhibit of the woman African Museum.
And actually, that is one of the impetuses behind creating that handout, essentially, that just does carry some of those facts. There actually was a plaque with that photograph that we're looking to restore because it's kind of beat up. But yeah, a lot of stuff is in process, but the prod is always helpful. And if you stop at the library today, you will see an exhibition of Sojourner Truth books out on our circulation counter. So thank you. But yeah, keep those cards and letters coming. Yeah. So yeah, right. Not you, but the one right behind, and then you. Okay.
I wonder if there could be a call out to the Hudson Valley in the same way that the African American Museum at the Smithsonian asked people to bring in objects and documents and anything that was significant. And I've read about it and saw news clips, but it was a beautiful coming together of people and telling a story and bringing these things. And I wonder if the same things that are going to go into yard sales and auctions might be possible if there was a way that the library was set up. And I think there's probably a way that there are tax benefits that could be part of that. Or I think it's part of reparations too, if we tie into giving back in some way. But I think it could be a beautiful way to bring awareness of the possibility of learning what people may have.
Well, excuse me. If I can speak quickly to that. One of our challenges as the library is our mission is to support primarily the instruction and research of the academic community, and so we're resourced to that end. And my hope in having this conversation was to sort of build just exactly the kind of awareness that you're talking about to the community, that think about, the possibility there is this environment in the library that would support housing these materials. So be mindful and share that fact. To run an archive is not cheap. So we have to balance in some ways the fact that we are committed to the primary mission of supporting the ongoing instruction and research of the college with the very clear, statement that part of that instruction does require, these materials. So it's that balance that we have to look at, and as others have said, the more people who are helping us explore these avenues, the better. At the same time, if we get inundated with everybody's garage sale, boxes and boxes, that's not a realistic task for us to go through and say, here's the good stuff. So it's a thoughtful process, but I think if we're not at least in conversation about it, we don't get anywhere, So that's what I really want to do is start a conversation on that. So then I think you were next, and I have hands over here, I see. Okay? Yep, go ahead.
Mercedes, correct?
to the Empire State Trail System, which they hope to open up by the year 2020. And I was surprised that at the Sojourner Truth Park here in New Paltz, as far as I'm aware, doesn't have a plaque or any information about Sojourner Truth. Although people come there to, launch for the New Paltz Regatta, and, this is going to be the biggest trail system within state in the entire country. So for people who aren't aware, it would seem like something on the system would be good to give a pointer to the library or different information. There is.
Thank you. It's a good thought. I know there's something about it. There's advocacy for a statue, I think. I don't know if there may be some people here know more about that.
Yeah, they're fighting over where to put it right now.
Okay.
And they're trying to find the money.
Yeah, but a new one I think was hoped for. So there's okay. I think you were first, and then you. Yeah. Okay. So the question, I'll repeat the question. How's that?
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm curious if you could invite people that have these documents to talk.
So the question is.
Sit up there with you guys, or just, asking them a whole bunch of questions. You guys are we're in the age of social media. As soon as we do done upload, let's talk about it, expose. That's the way that we have to start moving. Private meetings here. It's not private. Really, you know what I'm saying, that everyone's not here, so everyone's not going to be able to listen and hear the conversation that we're having. So I don't know if they would be open to coming to these calls. We have a Black Studies department, so I don't know if we have to send over a research thing or we have a Black Studies department. So, I mean,
I think, yeah.
Mark, can I?
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, social media is life now, so all we have to do is upload, and there's people that feel like this.
Right.
So it's not just us. So if there's a movement, that's where the movement will come in. Social media, that's just my opinion.
Right. And Naeem is a former student of mine, but then she graduated and she's pursuing her master's. Yes. But thinking about this question, I mean, thinking about what Mark is saying, thinking about what Naeem is saying, I think that first, we don't know if we need a fight yet. Not yet, right? We don't know yet. And I want to say to the students here, like I've taught and I've been to different universities, the students here are some of the most political and radicalized students that I've seen, right? And that's to say that you all are ready to go when it's time, right? I'm partially here because students protested and rallied and said we want a tenure track assistant professor who specializes in Black feminist studies. So I understand, like I get that culture, I get what you're trying to do. I don't know if we need that yet, right? And I think that we also have to understand this is going to be a big project, like you're saying. Where are you going to put all this stuff that's coming your way? Who are you going to use? You're going to need like a small staff of people. It's a big project. And so we're at the infancy stages, right? But thinking about this question of what we can do, there may be a time when we do need that, right? Because and again, I say to the students who are here who are asking Naima's question, who are saying, when can we do this? This is the time when your voices can be heard, right? This is the era in which students, you're watching what's going on in Parkland, Florida, in which students are spearheading movements, right? High school students, right? So you want to think about that in terms of there may come a time when we need that. We don't know yet, like you're saying. Sometimes these conversations can occur over coffee, and that's what you want, right? That's what you want idealistically. But I will say that's why I'm appealing to the students if there does come a time, because I feel the way you feel. There's an emotional connection to these documents, even though I'm not related to these people, obviously. But there's an emotional connection when you realize that your ancestors were enslaved and you don't even have access. My Black students can't even see these documents, right? Which is really where this kind of got me worked up. And I reached out to Mark, and he was kind enough to, to listen to my concerns. So, and I say that to say that Mark could have easily said, no, Nicole, this is not something that I want to do. But we had a conversation, and Mark pulled in his resources, and I met Greer, and I met Susan, I met AJ Williams-Meyers, who is, who is a legend around these parts. So I think, and what I'm saying, so we've all come together, very different people who have come together and been able to at least get this conversation started. And so there may come a point when and I'm here, and like I say, I've seen the students are always ready to go. And I know how powerful a student voice can be. But let us rely on you in a way in which that first we can think about collaboration first before we think about a kind of confrontation first. Right.
Thank you. Yes, you've been waiting.
I'm the Ulster County historian, and I've been doing this stuff for maybe 50 years. The greatest joy for me, because my specialty is music and before the Civil War, early American music, and people did not value that, and so I took a bid very hard, and was disappointed many times because people make sheet music and break the album apart so that they could sell the 1 or 2 pieces of sheet music that have thousands of covers, and all the stuff that the same stuff I'm doing here, which is where the parallel is. But I think that the greatest joy for me has been to go into an archive and say, what's in that box over here? And they go, I don't know. We haven't looked at that box in 50 years. And to go into that box and discover magic. And so, we talked about the town of Nicole already. There are 23 towns in Ulster County. And they may have records that are exactly what you need to acquire. And that's, you get graduates. You get graduate students, you get undergraduate students, and you can survey. You go out there and you look for this stuff. Maybe there may not be work, like mining for oil. But that's the joy of it. Which is going out and writing the story from the ground up, and you can get your hands on a solid document and finding having a repository to receive it, and maybe you have to make do with the facsimile because the town is not going to give up its record, but they may allow you to make a copy of it. And I know the senior is all about sort of putting that stuff online so that you don't even have to go to a research facility the way I did when I started. You could sit in home and computer and have access to it. And then when you know what you want and what the story is, then you go out and you look at the documents and the story. And you hold the original in your hand and talk to the cousins and the original one. But we also don't want, the county historian's responsibility doesn't want every person in the world handling documents that's 200 years old, unless they have a reason for doing that. And when you establish these traditions, we start studying microfilms, microfiches in facsimiles first, and getting the research questions so we get it, what to do with it. But this is what I'm hearing here is like a call for exploitive kind of, now that we know that the documents are out there, let's have fun.
Well, I think it's a really good point that there are a lot of different ways to do this work. So I think
Can I just add to that?
Yeah. Sure.
I just wanted to add to what Jeff was saying. Maybe one of the starts is, I know that Vassar's been very involved with a finding aid for the state of New York. But maybe there's something, if you have students that want to do research, let's start out creating a finding aid that we go to all the different repositories and find out what everybody has and compile a list and start with that. At least we know what's there, and then we could possibly work on seeing if we could actually get some of it donated. Mm-hmm. But just actually seeing, because what Jeff was saying, there are all these counties. I know I've gone into small little museums or repositories, and all of a sudden I open up something, I'm like, oh my goodness, and I know that feeling of finding things that people haven't seen or don't know that they have. So it may be something, to think about, getting students involved with some kind of project, because we could partner with Vassar with that.
And it might even lead you to Oxford. It took me all the way to Oxford University, looking at the African here in Hudson Valley. It was amazing, following my sources.
So I see other hands here, and it's getting late, so I see, I think, 3 people. Put your hands up, people who want, okay, I see 1, 2, 3, 4. And then I think we'll have to wrap up. But before I turn it over to more questions, I want to say that, first of all, thank you for all of you for coming and bringing your wisdom and your energy to helping us start to kind of dig into this and explore. Getting the word out is so important. Secondly, I envision Sojourner Truth Day as an annual event, something where we can look at all the different ramifications. And I mentioned Professor Kuiper before. Her course was entitled Women and Work. And if you start to think about the economics of slavery, there's enormous material there to explore. So I encourage you to keep an eye out for this again next year, but also to be in touch in the meantime with any of us on the panel. I think would be happy to hear from people who have ideas and who have energy to start building on a strong foundation. And again, I will say, with administration support here in the library, we have a facility that we did not have. So when Susan was having a fight about getting those materials moved, there was no climate controlled facility in the town. Now there is. So there's lots of opportunity out there. Okay, so there was.
Before the question, can I just add one quick thing before the question, because I see people are leaving. Sometime in the last 6 months or so, I found a runaway notice that I just wanted to call your attention to, because I don't think anyone has found it before. And since we've been talking about Sojourner Truth, those of you that know a little bit about the story, she was forced after the man that she loved, Robert, was taken away from her and brutally beaten by the neighbor. Her husband, she was married, she was forced to marry a man named Thomas, or Tom, who was enslaved also by the Dumonts. The story is that when Thomas married her, he'd been married twice before, and he'd gone off and ran away and had gone to New York City. And I found the notice, which was really exciting. And again, I don't think most people have seen it, so I just wanted to share that with you because it was one of my big, exciting finds. So that's the notice.
So that's the prize.
That's the prize at the end.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Susan, for that and much more. Yes, yes, sir.
One of the sources, I think, are the churches and congregations in our community. I served one that's over 300 years old. They were founded in the early 1700s, and we have documents, handwritten. I wondered whether there would be an outreach amongst congregations, colleges, to look at some of those sources of historic work, and go back to all the churches. I think the language of contemporary resources.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I know they do actually. The Dutch Church on Huguenot Street has records.
Yep.
I might add to that SPG, Society for the Propagation of the Gospel in Foreign Parts. SPG. Are you familiar with the SPG? Society for the Propagation of the Gospel in Foreign Parts. The missionaries were spread throughout the valley. I read their papers, and they are really terrific, I'm telling you. So that's not a possibility.
Good. Where are you? There was. Oh, okay. Yeah.
One of the things that it's more a comment than a question, is it seems, it occurs to me that a critical part is what is occurring here. Because we're not talking about African American history. We are talking about American history.
Correct.
And as long as people hold it separately, and I'm not denying the value of given that it's not been present at all, of bringing it up, but that as long as those who are not
for whom that is not their heritage, do not value it, then it perpetuates. So I think a huge part of the conversation is that we all have to view all of it, the Native American, the atrocities, and the benefits. All of that is all of our history. And that's a thing that conversations like this bring it all together. And then people have a different point of view about what they do with the document when they find it. If I have something that is of value to me as my culture, whether it's about somebody who has the same color skin as mine or not, then I operate with that document differently than if I just hold it as something that is there.
That's very powerful. Thank you. Thank you. So.
Anybody over there?
Yes. Right. Yep.
Loudly.
So the question was, is our facility, meaning the library, is it large facility? Was the question that can house? No, I understand. Yeah, the climate-controlled space. No, it's not huge, which is part of the challenge. I mean, it doubled in size as a result of this renovation, so that's very important. But as I've said, we need to kind of balance the really strong need versus our capacity, to ingest it. So in other words, if we take in 19 boxes of stuff and it just sits in a room somewhere, how helpful is that? So that's why the conversation is so important, so that we can start to have, the dialogue and have people who are willing to start doing that digging as well. I don't know if that really answers it. Yeah. Absolutely. Yep. As needed, they certainly can be involved in, and there have been gifts to the library in the past of cash, of donations that can be put toward purposes like this. Absolutely. Yep. I think there was one more. Yes. The first publication of it? I don't know. I don't know off the top of my head. No. Does anyone? The Sojourner Truth's narrative? Yeah, I don't know.
I have copies of the narrative, Sojourner Truth narrative.
Yeah. I'll give her a call. Can't hurt. Yeah. Okay, last one. Okay. Go ahead.
What your vision is as to what medium looks for things that you'd like to see as part of the archive.
I very much agree with Nicole's assessment that, and others here as well, I think, said the tangible object means so much more because, frankly, a screen, has two meanings, right? Like it's a screen on which you can see things. It's also a screen. Screens are used to block things, and in a sense, not coming in contact with the objects themselves lacks that, and Susan said this as well, lacks that emotional component. So it does make sense to me as the, as the library director to look for ways to put resources toward those tangible objects, even if they're pretty expensive. But that, if you take, No, I don't want to say, oh, well, it's this but not that, because I think that, but what I'm saying is it's many different directions. So I think the physical, tangible, historical objects that are contemporary to Sojourner Truth, yes, absolutely, we want those. And I think we're just starting the conversation as to what is the range and the scope. There is artwork, there are photographs that are more recent, but still are part of that legacy, which is why I use the word legacy. So I think if you believe, and I think the speaker here was saying, this is our history and it's meaningful, then let's talk. Because I'm interested, and I think it can only inform the scholarship. That's my driver, is the instruction and the resources for the community that has been lacking them. So I don't know if anyone else wants to comment. If you're thinking of, I don't know, Nicole, AJ, lists, but I think you could be too closed about it. Our history is so broad, Yeah.
I just want AJ to read something as we're closing.
Okay, so I want to just thank everybody for coming out. I know we're a little bit over time, but I couldn't be happier about the turnout, and I think the energy here. Stay tuned. Please do be in touch with any of us if you didn't get a chance to speak but want to. My information's online, and I think a lot of us here too. So
I'll just be, if you want to be involved, we'll just give you a sheet of paper and you can just put your name and
yeah, just come right on down.
address.
Yeah, great, thanks. Yeah.
I just want to mention, in Fort Hill, if you Google it, someone did a statue of Sojourner Truth as a 10-year-old girl. And when school classes go to see it, they relate to her in a very different way. So if you have a chance, that's Fort Hill.
Thank you. Okay, turning it to AJ.
All right. This is Stessin-Cohn, the Akan bird, in terms of our history. Reach back and gather the best of what our past has to teach so that we can achieve our full potential as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.